Hello, this is Read Into the Unknown, and today we're talking about the 20 Days of Turin by Giorgio de Maria. So this was a book written in 1977 and originally in Italian. So now I'm reading this book 50 years later with an English translation. So I am sure I am missing a lot. I'm missing a lot of the context, and I'm missing a lot just from the translation of it. But there is something interesting about this book, and I can't even quite define what is so interesting about this book that I really want to talk about it. Now, it has more reviews than I would normally want to have on something I reviewed in this channel. It's currently sitting at a 3.68 on Goodreads with 3,107 reviews. I would normally want books that are well under 1,000, maybe even under 100. But there's something about this book that just really wants me to talk about it. The premise of this book is, before it was written, 10 years before it was written, there was an incident in Turin. That for 20 days, there was a series of violent, brutal murders that was happening all over the city, that was also happening at the same time as a widespread insomnia outbreak. So no one can sleep, and everyone's getting murdered. 10 years later, the narrator, unnamed, is trying to investigate these events to figure out what happened, because no one got an adequate explanation on why all the murders happened. At the same time, there's intrigue and mystery happening with the library. Now, this wasn't an ordinary one. This was less about books and novels and more about people's diaries and confessions. You would pay money to submit your diary, or your entry, or your confession into the library, and then people could pay to read it, and they could even pay to figure out who wrote it. So initially it'd be anonymous, but people could pay to figure out who you were. The people who proposed this suggested that it would be a way of bringing people together, because you could anonymously confess someone, and if someone thought, oh, that sounds so much like me and my struggles, they could pay to know who you were so you could make friends, get connections. And doesn't that feel just a little bit like some of the social media we have? So there was something really interesting in how 50 years ago, someone is talking about the way that anonymity, that being anonymous on the internet and on certain social media platforms could bring out the idea that you could confess some of these things. You could talk about some very deep and intimate moments of your life, and that could really connect to people who might be thinking the same thing. Hashtag relatable. But let's get into the actual book. So the book starts out. His name in itself will mean close to nothing nowadays to people caught up in very different business from our own, but we'll give it regardless. Giovanni Bergoglio. So the novel starts off with, once again, the unnamed narrator going around and trying to find clues and witnesses for the events of the 20 Days of Turin. And he starts off with one of the first victims. He goes to the victim's sister's house, where she just tells him a little bit about his life, but nothing really stands out. She doesn't even want to talk about what happened around that time. She wants to talk about her brother's childhood. She wants to talk about how much, she loved him, cared about him. And then the guy tries to press, but what about close to the time? And quite frankly, we don't really get a lot of information from this, just that there's a new wave of spirituality that is sweeping through the city right now, and the sister is part of it. The narrator then goes to other people. He goes to a lawyer who supposedly heard a lot of the events. Lawyer doesn't really tell him much, just gives him a book and says, hey, you really want to read this one chapter here about statues. He goes to the mayor, who says, I can't tell you much, but oh boy, that library. As you can see, he's going around and he might be getting some clues from these people, but right now it all just feels very disconnected. Also, people keep talking about the library. They mention it in basically every time he goes to question people. But right now, we have no connection between people's confessions and all these murders that took place. But I do think it was interesting, his conversation with the mayor when they were talking about this library. Because the author, the narrator, was going, hey, didn't this actually bring people together? Were there no friendships formed? Everyone seems to act like this was a big dirty secret of the town. But when you think about it, wouldn't being able to connect to people like this make it easier for people to find out more about themselves, their companions, bring people together, make them feel less alone? And the mayor went, no, it didn't work out like that. You would write a confession, and now people thought that they knew you. And then so they'd figure out who you were. They'd pay the money to find out who you were. And so now they know you, but they don't know you. And they're following you around, and they're staring at you. And this feels very much like a parasocial relationship. How many times has someone online confessed to something that seems, oh, wow, that is a very hefty confession. And now you feel like, well, now I know you. But do you really? You know someone's confession. You know something very deep and intimate about them. Maybe you found out about someone's past abuse, their childhood trauma, and they're willing to share that to make you feel less alone. But do you really know about that person? You know about one dark secret. That doesn't mean you know the person. But it's very easy to think, well, I know this about you. I know this intimate part about you. This means I know you, but you really don't. So I can see how a place like this would lead to a lot of incidents of stalking and wouldn't necessarily bring people together. It would just keep people in this big cycle of confessions and secrets, in like possessiveness over the people they read the secrets about, while never actually bridging a real connection between people. Once again, what does this have to do with the murders? More on that later. So after talking to the mayor, he gets permission to read some of the books that were saved from the library, because I gotta say, this book was a little, it wasn't like hard to read, but it was, and sometimes I feel like certain details were a bit obfuscated. So what happened to the library? I don't know. It just stopped existing, at least physically, because they don't really talk of, like, maybe he did and I missed it. I will fully accept that. But it feels like there was never a true mention of what happened to end the library. But right now, all we're left with are a few remnants of all the books that were in there. And so the mayor gives him permission to go down and read some of these confessions to see, I guess, if this helps him learn what's going on with the murders. Once again, why is the library connected to the murders? I don't know. I guess it was things that happened around the same time. Maybe one led to the other. I could kind of see that, but once again, no one ever is very clear on why they think these two are connected. So he goes in, reads some of the confessions, and okay, a little bit of a content warning. These get weird, as you would imagine anonymous confessions do. So, trigger warning for weird, creepy men and poop stuff. Okay? I won't dwell on this long, so feel free to skip forward a little bit. So, two of the confessions he reads. One of them is an old grandpa who is lusting after a girl who is as young as his granddaughter. Fair, I guess. What else are we expecting? The other one is a little bit more unhinged. It's a woman confessing that she is unsatisfied in her marriage and her husband is clearly unsatisfied too. So she wants a young man to come and help her poop. I don't... You know what? I'm not even going to go any further into that. I am glad that the book doesn't dwell super long on it. It's just a couple paragraphs. It's weird. But I guess it does get at the kind of things people were confessing in this. And I can see why it would lead to very weird and strange situations happening. But he gets done with all the questioning for the day. He goes through papers where people talk about what they heard that night, how they heard horrible sounds and screams, as you'd imagine. It talks about how a lot of people had the insomnia. Not everyone who had the insomnia died. The narrator even claims that he had a touch of it himself, because he was living in this town at the same time. This is his town. And as one of the people he interviewed suggested, he reads this book about statues, which just talks about their statues everywhere, and we wouldn't notice if they had moved around because no one ever notices statues. He asks a random woman, did you ever go to the library? I swear I saw you there. Didn't we ever meet there? And it's clear that everyone is very uncomfortable with mentions of this library. And then as he's digging more and more, it just seems like there is more and more of a conspiracy to keep all this quiet. He even has a nun come up to him and says, you're digging into things you really shouldn't. You should be really accepting the way things are and accepting the word of God and just letting things lie. Way more to it than that. No one is ever very brief in how they talk in this book. But there is such a mystery about who killed all these people that I was very shocked that only about a third of the way through the book, we get an audio recording of what happened that night. And you could hear all these sounds and these guttural things, and it makes you just feel horrible listening to it. And the sounds start to morph, and they become more and more like speech. And when the speech does become clearer, it's just like the voices are horrible, but it's one going, I have a view with a lake, I have an island, I have a mountain, and it's just very like weird, almost like what you would imagine trolls to say in a very old school fairy tale. And as these voices keep talking about what they see and what they have, they start to argue like, I want that, well, I want that. I guess we should have a battle. Yes. And what should our weapons be? Let's take one of these. It's on the ground. Oh, good idea, but we should test one first. Test to see how durable it is. Swing, smash. That was a human. So, whatever these voices were, they aren't human, and they were going around arguing about what they saw and what that meant that they owned. And then they decided they were going to duel using people as clubs. Okay. Well, mystery solved, I guess? Well, that's the thing. We now kind of have an idea of what happened to, like, all the people, and while all the people died, what does that have anything to do with the library? And why, if we had this recording, did it never come out in the past 10 years? Well, it definitely seems like people are trying to keep this secret for some reason that I still don't exactly know why. But the man who took the recording, he is very soon after killed. There are a lot of threatening calls to the narrator. He's getting calls that he answers and there's no one on the other line. There's people following him. He notices a bunch of people that are just standing around taking notes. And then he starts receiving very strange letters, supposedly from a man who just wants a random pen pal. And the man talks about how he crawls every day up the 8 stories to his apartment. What? So the supposed pen pal is saying, hey, I'm just trying to find a random person to talk to, so I send out these letters every day and hope someone will respond. I live on the 8th floor of an apartment, but all the stairs are gone, so I have to crawl up the walls. And all the bottom floors are filled up with trash. And now they're filling, once again, content warning, more poop for some reason. But the bottom floors are filling up with trash, and now they're filling up with human waste. And the pile is getting higher and higher, and now it's at the 6th floor, now it's at the 7th floor. Maybe it'll get so high that I'll have to just start living off of poop. Okay. But then the narrator goes, this is unhinged, I'm gonna respond. Okay. But that's the thing, he does start to respond, and the longer he does, the more it seems to degrade his mind. It's like responding to these weird letters starts to like drag him into like this mindset, or just, once again, it's not quite explained what's going on. So, and there's more to do with the library has still gone on and started acting in secret. So instead of like a central building for everything, people are using like trash cans as drop points for them to leave and receive these diaries and confessions again. And so on top of them being kind of secret around, now they're also trying to bring people in on this by leaving random letters and notes everywhere. It's like they're trying to use this in order to bring everyone in this mindset, almost like this is the way that you are using group control or something. Like you control the population by getting them all in on this library concept, these confessions, by searching for the confessions, by reading these confessions. I feel like I'm missing context for what's happening in Italy in the 1970s, because like how Dune has all this background with the Arab Spring, so you really can get more if you do know about this time. There is so many parallels in that. I feel like I need to understand what happened in Italy in the 1970s. What was going on? And I mean, on a very like not just, oh, this is the global. No, I need to know what the mindset of the 1970s was going on, because I feel like there is something there, but it's also just hard to get. It's very hard for me to figure out what this author is trying to say, because there is something there. There is something with this idea of everyone is sort of voyeuristically looking in on everyone's lives, and it's becoming sort of an addiction to them to find out these secrets about all their companions and neighbors. And there's a vested interest in keeping this going, and they want to keep people doing this, but again, to what end? Maybe that's why I really wanted to talk about this, because there is something so interesting about this. Oh, right, and let's go finish up what's happening with the murders. Once again, I am never sure what the connections between these two are. Once again, I could just be dumb. I could have just missed something. But let's continue. All while the narrator is looking more into the murders in the library and finding out all these things and getting followed, getting phone calls, finding out the person who made the recordings got murdered. So things are escalating. In the middle of all this, he has a friend come in from Venice. The friend is all life and love and music. He's a artist, he's a musician. And he's like, hey man, you need to come to Venice. Venice is where everything is amazing. You should come, you should take your recorder that the narrator plays. You should come, take your recorder, and you should come and make beautiful music with me. And he's like, I've really got to figure out what's happening with these murders. A few days later, I need to not figure out what's happening with these murders. I'm going to Venice. So he goes, and at some point he broke his recorder, so he buys a new one, and he's like, I'm leaving the city. He tells one of the people, the second person he interviewed, the lawyer who told him read the book about the statues. They've been in contact this entire time. It doesn't really matter, but he's like, hey, I gotta leave the town. I'm going to Venice. Lawyer's like, cool, I'm leaving too, but I'm a lawyer. That's not hard for me to do. So the narrator, he can still feel things ramping up and ramping up. He still knows he's getting followed. He's still getting the phone calls. But he gets his ticket to Venice. He boards a plane. And as he's walking up the tarmac, he's walking up the stairs to the plane. He's like, oh, there's a lot of people seeing us off. That's interesting. He looks in the crowd. The first person he interviewed, the first victim's sister, is in the crowd. So are a lot of people he's seen around town. A lot of people he thinks has been following him. And he's just, what's all that about? He finishes going up the plane, to which I'm sure we're all thinking, if everyone who has been sort of following you and who's been acting weird about you, if all of them are standing outside the plane, maybe this is a bad idea to get on the plane. Even the nun who threatened you, who said you need to stop looking into this or God's gonna punish you, she's standing outside the plane. I feel like this is a sign that you shouldn't have gotten on the plane. Maybe you should have taken a train. But he gets on the plane, he takes a nap, and then when he wakes up, he's like, oh man, that was a really good nap. We must be at Venice. Oh man, it feels like I slept for hours. Just funny, because Venice is only, a short flight. He looks, oh, that's the ocean. Oh, this was probably a trap. He looks around, everyone else is just horrible and nervous, and he realizes no one has on their seatbelts. Like, they don't care if they live or die on this. Like, even on takeoff, no one had put on their seatbelts. They aren't expecting to live through whatever is going on. Or they would rather die than go to wherever we're going. And everyone else seems to know where they're going, except him. Goody. Eventually, they finally make it to an island where the plane lands. Everyone disboards. No one fights, no one screams, no one does anything. They just line up in one column and second column, and they walk up to these 20-foot tall statues that proceed to move and grab the first person in line, starts to swing them around. So the narrator stops, realizes what his fate is, and starts to play the recorder. So, statues are alive and we're bludgeoning each other with people. And no one wanted this information to get out. And it is kind of an interesting reveal because statues keep getting mentioned, but I gotta say, I, once again, don't know if I'm dumb or if it's just that weird, but it took me a few days after finishing the book to realize, oh, statues were the ones doing this. That was not super clear to me. Once again, what does this have to do with the library? So, it is a book that confuses me. It is a book that says so much, and I don't know what it's saying. There are so many words. There's such an interesting story. There's an interesting mystery that the author doesn't seem like they want to explore. They want to explore the ideas of everything. They want to explore the idea of the library. They want to explore the idea that no one is paying attention to statues, so what if they're all going around killing people? They want to explore this idea of social degradation. But they have interesting concepts that it feels like they are not focusing on. You have such an interesting premise, and I feel like the interesting premise was fifth on this guy's list of what he wanted to talk about. And hey, I guess that says something. Like, the author really wanted to talk about his ideas of what was degrading society more than he wanted to talk about random murders for 20 days and the insomnia plague and a library that causes people to slowly lose their minds. So, in the end, would I recommend you read this book? I don't know. Oh, I guess I gotta hurry up before the roommate gets here. I don't know. Maybe. It wasn't a hard read. Even with the weird stuff in it, I didn't feel disgusted reading it. But it's just not as satisfying as you would think it would be. It takes all these high ideas and it just wants to think, it wants to mull over the ideas instead of the story. So maybe read it, because it is a very interesting experience, but don't expect a satisfying story. Also, maybe learn more about Italy in the 1970s than I did before going into it. Also, recognize that this is a translation 40 years after the fact. And then, it's a 50-year-old book, so it's going to be a little different. Anyway, that's me. That's my Roomba making way too much noise. So, thank you and goodbye. It is not stopping. Oh well, I'll work on this part later.